Hello and welcome to Events Dear Boy, the podcast for anyone involved in business events. If you're a conference producer, corporate event organiser or events agency, then we're here for you. We want to share the highs and the lows, the best practices and the horror stories. You can expect ideas and inspiration and maybe some laughs too.
And if you're a speaker at these events, then we're also here for you. We'll be talking about how you do it, what makes speakers nervous, and how it feels when it all goes brilliantly or terribly.
My name is Catherine McNamara and I'm the marketing lead at talent agency Pomona Partners and someone who has organised many business events in my working life. Alongside me is Pomona Partners founder and veteran of 1,000 speaking gigs, Tom Cheesewright.
A veteran of 1,000 TV interviews after last week, which for those watching and listening in sort of September, it's just after the global outage around Microsoft and CrowdStrike, which kept me very busy. Anyway, each episode we're going to be joined by a guest from the business event space, either an organizer or a speaker. We'll ask them to share their experiences, both good and bad, and their tips for other people in their positions.
And this week we're joined by Vimla Appadoo. Vimla, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
No, really great to have you here. So let's launch in. Can you tell us about your area of expertise?
Yeah, of course. So I think it kind of falls into two camps. So I'm a trained service designer and have worked in the service design digital space for kind of years now, almost 2 decades, I think. And so I do a lot of talking and guidance around how to be a service designer, what design thinking is, how to build diverse teams and build products and services that represent communities and different cultures. And on top of that, it's kind of led me into what Honey Badger is and the consultancy that I run, which is culture design, and really working with organisations on how to build better cultures, develop their own culture toolkits, and understand the power structures and dynamics that exist within their workplaces. And that's what I tend to do my keynotes and public speaking on at the moment.
It's really interesting to me because there's been this kind of evolution over the last decade, it feels like, where the sorts of talks and information that leaders are looking for has almost like gone through a shift in its level of sophistication from being quite mechanical and kind of inhuman really about 10 years ago to much more people wanting to get a grip on things like culture. And it feels like it's quite nascent still in many ways. Like most people don't really understand what they're talking about when they talk about culture. So there must be quite a demand for someone with your sort of that expertise, particularly in building teams that have that good culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when the kind of sectors I work in predominantly kind of are scale up cultures, and it's interesting to see how you move from the founders determining the culture just based on what their working patterns are through to them being conscious about the culture that they want as they grow from kind of 2 people to 10 people, and then actually jumping from 10 people to 30 people and like needing the infrastructure policies and support for teams as well. So it's kind of that space. And then when you move to an even bigger organization, how do you celebrate micro cultures within that and enable your teams to have separate cultures that align to your business goals and objectives but still operate independently? And that's the bit that I think leaders find the hardest, is that it's okay for different teams to have different cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you and I should just do a completely separate podcast about this, because I think there is such an idea that there should be uniformity when actually different parts of the organization should be diverse in lots of different ways, including having the right culture of like performance and everything else for that bit of the organization.
Yeah, and I also think what we've seen, like when you mentioned kind of how things have changed over the last 10 years, we've gone from hiring for job roles to what I prefer of like hiring for the person. And I think that shift hasn't happened everywhere, but the people who aren't working in that way are getting left behind, because the new generation of employees don't want to just be a job title. They want to know that they can join the network or have different types of power or like be their whole selves in the workplace. So really it's business fundamental that this change happens, otherwise you're not going to be able to hire the best talent.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So Vimla, how did you go from kind of working in this area to then speaking on the topic in terms of that connection into kind of an events world? What was that journey like?
I don't know how common this journey is, but I am a natural introvert and did my first public speaking gig as a community event. It was actually Ladies Like UX in Manchester. And I remember my first talk was innovation and empathy, and how you need empathy at the bedrock of how you innovate. And I signed up on a whim, had never done any public speaking before, and was like, I need to do this to push myself out of my comfort zone. And got really good feedback for it, and just continued to talk from there. And so started off doing the practitioner-led talks around, this is what service design is, this is how I work, this is my methodology, and doing that at community events, really small kind of meetups and opportunities like that. And that kind of led me to doing bigger, bolder, more keynote events where I was able to actually get more of my thought process and kind of strategic leadership stuff out there. And at the same time as my career was developing and I was getting more senior, it meant I could do more of the senior stakeholder stuff.
And what did that mean in terms of the types of events you got asked to do? Because I know it's evolved from more of the community-led events into bigger stuff. Like, what was that transition like, and what do those events look like today?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of the conferences I get to speak at are more technology and digital-led conferences, so still quite practitioner-based, but I'm getting asked to speak about the culture side from a inspiration, change the world type perspective, which is absolutely my bag. And more recently getting asked to go into the corporate space to do internal events and conferences, and actually a lot more facilitation of teach us how to do this, teach us how to set up the teams and run the workshops, and leave us with a toolkit. That's
cool. People are asking more and more for talks that are interactive but also instructive. Like, people want a takeaway, don't they?
Yeah. And actually, yeah, I've really found that with my content over the last more like 5 years, is where I went from initially just being inspiration led of like, watch this talk and leave like feeling like you want to do something, to actually leave with the checklist of things to do when you get back to the office. And that's been really reassuring, that, and you can kind of see people taking pictures of the slides of like, this is what you need to do, and that's great. So hopefully they're doing it.
It's interesting. I was talking to someone the other day about how hard it is sometimes to actually gauge feedback from an audience.
Yeah.
But if they're taking photos of the slides, it's usually a pretty good sign.
Yeah, photos of the slides, and if I can get a laugh, then I know I'm doing all right.
Brilliant.
But I also think one of the things, like being an introvert, I say that during my talks, and it's authentic and I mean it. And the reason I say it at the beginning is because I don't think often when you get a keynote or someone speaking, there's a bravado of like how easy it is or how well tuned the talk is. And actually, I want to just make it, my whole thing's about being who you are and authentic. So if I can get that vulnerability out there at the beginning, I think it helps show other people that they can do it too. And I think that's one of the kind of unique things about my talks, and the feedback that I get is that it is authentic and it is vulnerable and able to bring people on that journey.
So what is it that you love the most about speaking? Because it's interesting that that journey started by just pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and thinking, I just need to do something like this, to now it being such a large part of your life.
Yeah.
But what is it what's the thing that really makes it tick for you?
I think there's two things. I think I feel like what I say is quite unique. I go to a lot of events and conferences as well, and I don't often hear people on the stage tell the story or have the same opinions that I do. So yet anyway, I'm sure they obviously are, but yeah, I've not come across it yet. And then the other things, like a diversity aspects, like there aren't a lot of people like me on stages, especially in the technology and digital space, keynoting. And I think that's something that really is important to me, and that I do call out when I'm on stage of like, this is a special thing that you're seeing here. Like, you're not often going to be listening to someone like me. So, and actually that's one of my main things to keep doing it, is because I know I need to keep, if I'm not doing it, then they're going to get someone who looks like everyone else. Yeah. I was going to say you, Tom, but I didn't want to bring it out.
No, but it's true. I mean, part of the reason Pomona has a particular focus, I mean, we've not set out to try and solve all of speaking's diversity issues, but part of the reason we have such a focus on women is because of my experience. And so often being in a room full of men and a stage full of men. And yeah, you talk to organisers afterwards, and they say it's so hard to get women. It's like, well, no, it isn't anymore. It's like you pick up the phone to one person and we can solve this problem for you.
So that's the kind of the good end of the spectrum, Vimla. If we took it to the other end of the spectrum and said, what's the worst speaking experience that you've had? Could you share that with us?
Oh, a worst one. The first thing that sprung to my mind was when I was just absolutely like full of flu and pushed myself to do it. And I could hardly hear. I didn't know what my voice was like. Luckily, it was a talk I'd given a couple of times, so I knew the content really well, but had to travel really far for the talk as well. And just, yeah, I was just not well. And I couldn't make the most of it because I couldn't do the networking or anything afterwards. So I was just kind of like in and out and like just horrifically poor, like just not well. And then the other is, and the talk went really, really well, but actually there was one bit of feedback at the end of it that's always stuck with me. And it was a talk mainly about diversity and inclusion and do like how to be better. And actually it's one of the reasons I started to do the checklist element is because your typical the white middle-aged man came up to me at the end and went, "You just made me feel really bad about being a white man." And I was like, well, that's not my fault. That's because you're not doing enough. And I went, okay, well, thank you for that feedback, but what should I have done differently? And he said, like, tell me what to do. Don't just make me feel bad. Give me the list. And that's also one of the reasons why I started to change my talks. But yeah, that's always stuck with me. It's not necessarily something that went wrong or that was bad, but just a very poignant bit of unsolicited feedback.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think if you are going to engender emotions in an audience, you have to give them a way to resolve those emotions as well.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
That's really interesting.
It was a big learning for me. Yeah.
That's interesting. And it's funny that you've mentioned the turning up when you're not feeling quite 100% or kind of 10% even, because a few people have actually made the reference back to I rocked up with an ailment, and actually it was just the worst decision because it all spiraled from the point of just feeling ill in the morning. So
I just don't know why I did it. I don't know what it was in me that didn't just say, look, I can't do it today, because it wasn't even like I was the only speaker. I had other people. So yeah,
it's a commitment. That's what it is. A commitment to the cause.
Absolutely. So to that effect, what tips would you give to other speakers other than like don't turn up ill? if you can help it.
Well, I think don't be afraid to say no is probably it, and actually, can you make more of that relationship if you're in a better state than if you're not? Because now I'm a bit too like I don't want to go back to them and be like, oh, have you got any other gigs lined up or anything like that, just because I know I just didn't perform to my best. The other is, so I'm when I do my talks, I never write a script, and everyone that I've spoken to says write a script. And I think finding your way of delivering and talking is really important, and whatever makes you the most comfortable. And I've done a TED talk, and it was the only time I did a script, and actually that was probably one of my worst performances as well, because I was trying to remember what to say rather than talking authentically to what I wanted to say. So yeah, finding your way of delivering and what works for you is definitely what I'd give to other speakers.
It's interesting. Everyone has their own method, don't they? I think we're probably finding this in part through this podcast that some people script rehearse and then step away from the script. Some people never script at all. I write a narrative arc. It's all, everyone's got to find their own way completely.
And to the organisers of these events, what's your advice to them? How do they get the best out of their speakers? What would you ask? What's your ask as a speaker to, get the best from us?
Yeah, clear instructions is always helpful. Where to turn up, what time, and like what to expect. So do I need my laptop? Do I need an adapter? What kind of mic will I have? Especially for me, who always wears the wrong type of clothing for a clip-on mic. So just letting me know what kind of mic it's going to be is always really helpful. And I'm also really short, so if you've got me at a lectern, I need to know so that I can I know what kind of shoes to wear. But yeah, the setup's really important. I move around quite a lot and talk with my hands. So if I've got a handheld mic, it really changes the way I deliver. So being aware of that kind of things is really important. And knowing the timing is crucial for me. So if it's after lunchtime, it changes the dynamic a little bit of how I'll do my talk. If it's a closing talk, again, I'll change my ending. And it is likewise if it's the opening, you bring a different energy. So yeah, knowing where you are in the day is really important.
That's really interesting. You're the first person to say that, I think, but you're so right. There is a different tenor and a different sort of consideration depending on where you are in the slot, isn't there?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And what day of the conference you are. If you're on the first day or the last day, it makes a huge difference as well. Last speaking slot is one of the hardest, I have to say, but actually one of the most fulfilling as well.
I think I love doing that slot if I've got the opportunity to draw the threads together and wrap up. I hate doing that slot when actually everybody's leaving to catch the train.
Exactly. It depends what the social is afterwards, doesn't
it? Yeah. If the social was the night before and people's hangovers are really, really starting to beat them up by 4:00 in the afternoon, then it's not a fun slot to do.
Yeah.
Is that one of our core questions, Tom, when we're speaking to event organisers? What is the
when's the social?
Is there an after party?
Is there an incentive for people to stick around after our person's been on?
Yeah. Do you know the
probably
other
should be actually. I think it's an interesting one.
It is an interesting one. And the other thing that makes a really big difference to me is if you get to meet the other speakers beforehand or not. So is there a speakers dinner or social? And is there a green room that you all hang out in together during the day? They're nice to have, absolutely, but they do make a big difference to your experience as a speaker.
Yeah, they do. It's it depends on the green room.
What's your worst green room ever experience?
Well, we probably
could
have that as a question actually on this podcast. Have you had a terrible green room experience? I think we've already talked about it on this podcast. I've only had a very amusing green room experience, which was for telly rather than a talk, with a member of a 90s/noughties girl band, an actor from a famous American soap opera, and the cast of a panto.
Wow.
And the etiquette expert, William Hanson, who's a friend. And yeah, William and I ended up coming up with an idea for a sort of extras style TV show called Contributors, or The Green Room, based on how ridiculous that morning was. A combination of, mostly driven by the drunken antics of the American sitcom or American soap star, who this was breakfast television. Who turned up. I have told this story before, but I think we actually lost it in the edit.
No, we did. You're right. It was when we had really bad tech problems. This sounds like an episode of Inside Number 9, actually, Tom. So you're going to have to continue speaking. Would you like to elaborate?
This soap star turned up sockless, clearly in last night's suit and absolutely reeking of whiskey at 6:30 in the morning, having basically not left the hotel bar the previous night, and was utterly incapable of going on. And was extremely inappropriate to everybody else in the green room.
Oh, no.
You'll have to share names after we finish recording.
Yeah.
They are not going on air.
No.
I want to know who the girl band was.
That I probably can share, but I'll save it for another day. I'll save it for a social.
Excellent. So I think that's an amazing place to wrap today's episode up, and thank you so much for coming on, Vimla. That's been brilliant. And
absolutely,
Thank you too for listening and watching, and we hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please leave us a review, like and subscribe, and importantly, share with your colleagues, whether they're speakers or event organisers, or they just feel like they can get some value from listening to us speak for half an hour, which is always grand. So we'll be back soon with another episode. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.